Are you kidding me?
No.
We're talking about that in this episode.
Totally, yeah. And then I want you to nerd out on that.
Your energy and you as a human is making the biggest difference.
Thank you.
I'm actually curious how it all started. You have a bachelor's in agriculture, master's in soil science.
Yes. Well, it's finally sexy. Where was it when I needed it, right? Like now you say you're a soil scientist, people are like, say more. We put together the Skin Deep database where we looked at personal care products and the ingredients in them.
That's why I trust you. You guys are like, no, we're not putting it out there unless we have the facts.
Yeah. Farmers were told that they could use sewage sludge on their land as a fertilizer.
Oh,
40 years ago, right? And in some cases, it has gotten into the food. There are great companies out there that want to do the right thing, but they're not rewarded for it.
Especially when these other brands are using words like natural and clean.
FDA doesn't require testing or detailed profiles of any of these chemicals before it goes in your product.
You're helping people do their best because it's not sustainable to be perfect. Just that little bit that you can do, making that right choice and wherever you can afford it, I think it's really great. I'm actually curious how it all started because I was reading about you and you have a bachelor's in agriculture, right? Master's in soil science.
Yes.
I'm so interested in soil and soil health, but I need to get more educated. So probably another day I'm gonna pick your brain.
Okay.
Maybe another episode, it's just about soil.
Absolutely, right. Absolutely. It's finally sexy. Where was it when I needed it?
I know,
right? Like,
right?
Now you say you're a soil scientist, people are like,
tell me more.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
But back then it was like, what?
Why
would someone do that?
Right, because you were obviously, if you majored in these things, you were clearly interested. But I'm curious what you were doing as work before you started EWG, and what was it in that work that was like, wait a minute, I need to create a company and make these changes?
Yeah, I mean, I came to Washington in '76, Washington, D.C., and started working for the Library of Congress, the Congressional Research Service. And that's the part of the congressional system of support that answers questions members of Congress have. And I was assigned to agriculture. I had brought my master's degree in soil science, and everyone assumed when they hired me that I'd be answering questions about natural sciences and soil conservation, forestry, these kinds of things. But this was during a period when the farm economy was just at the bottom, and farmers were driving tractors on the mall in Washington, plowing it up in protest of low prices, low incomes. Farmer suicides were going through the roof.
They were driving tractors on them?
To protest, yeah. They were, like in France, right?
Wow.
The French farmers don't mess around. They just get their tractors out on the highway and stop everything.
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, but here, it hadn't happened until, that in 1976. And so I, was shifted. They said, we need someone who can write and think, and you need to learn about the farm subsidy system. So I started learning about that from some really great people that worked at the Library of Congress. And so there's a method to my madness here. Eventually what happened was, years later, maybe 5 or 6 years later, the early 80s, a small group of people were interested in how we could take the farm subsidy system and all the billions of dollars that went to farmers and maybe modify it so that it also supported conservation and environmental protection. Because we don't really regulate farmers. There's no one driving up on their farm and telling them what to do like you would if you had a factory and an inspector came and said your pollution's
So
too
this
high.
Is based on environmental or also the quality of the food? Or all of it?
Only environmental.
Okay, environmental.
Yeah. And so the first round of reform was to try and get these subsidy programs so that if you received a subsidy, you had to play by certain rules to protect your land, wetlands, swamps, soil erosion, you had to control that. And then we set up this big program to take land out of production for 10-year periods rather than a year at a time to control the amount of corn and wheat and soybeans that was grown. That was the structure back then of our farm subsidy system. That's changed quite a bit now. And so I was the guy who knew about conservation and the subsidy system, so I started working for environmental groups. I left the Library of Congress.
Okay.
I was a consultant, worked for Sierra Club, Audubon Society, American Farmland Trust, all these groups, and we put together legislative ideas in 1985 that became law. And from there, that kind of earned a reputation in environmental circles that would be hard to earn today because we no longer pass environmental laws, at least not that kind of environmental law. Earned a reputation that, got the attention of funders. I went for a while to work at World Wildlife Fund. I was their communications director, and then I was their lobbyist for a few years. And then I just decided to step away and start what became Environmental Working Group. And at first we were continuing that work at the interface of agriculture and environment, soil conservation, water quality, dealing with all those issues. Kind of obscure from this view, but they're real, right? And then I hired a guy named Richard Wiles, who was an expert on pesticides, because a funder wanted some help in that area. Richard and I then built out this organization that took on air pollution, food, tap water quality, mining in the Grand Canyon. We built a think tank that was premised on a couple of things. One, lots of data analysis. We had a database programmer that we hired in 1992.
Okay.
He's still with us.
So database programmer, so he was just...
Huge amounts of government data no one was looking at.
Wow. See, those are the things, I'm like, how do you even start a company like EWG? There's so much...
When I was at the Library of Congress, I always wanted to have those data, and I had some ability to manage when I got it, but you really needed a computer science expert. So we did that in
But it's available legally to the public.
You have to request it.
But
sometimes you have to,
okay.
You have to pull it out of these agencies sometimes.
Okay.
They're often unwilling to give it. So our first big story, as Environmental Working Group, was a report called Pesticides in Children's Food.
But so you first really started as an environmentalist, but did it naturally shift into, wait, it's hurting the environment and us?
Yes.
Okay.
And that was the leap with pesticides.
Okay.
And specifically pesticides and kids. The National Academy of Sciences was undertaking a study that was released at the same time. My colleague Richard Wiles, whom I mentioned, I'll be seeing him later this week here for Climate Week, he was one of the top experts in the country, in the world really, on pesticide policy. So this first report was timed to be released when the National Academy released its report, and that report said, children aren't just little adults. They are very different. They grow very quickly, so the doses of pesticides or any other toxic substance that they get per unit of body weight is much higher than it is for adults. We shouldn't be regulating pesticides for adults my size, and that's about what they were pegged towards. And
so there was regulation.
Oh, there was regulation.
But it was for adults, and it's like, is it even really regulating it?
And the National Academy said you need to change your thinking and protect kids, and that would lower the amount of pesticide that would be allowed. And some pesticides wouldn't be allowed at all if you started to take kids into account. Well, we had done a report that also made headlines that same weekend in 1993, and that was really how EWG kind of burst onto the scene, Mona. We came out of nowhere. I remember at the press conference, Marion Burroughs, the reporter from the New York Times, her first question, which is not the question you want, is, what is exactly this environmental working group? But
that's okay. That's
we
how
didn't
people
look
learn.
back. Yeah, we explained we just came up with that name one Friday. We were environmentalists working in a group, whatever. Let's not spend too much time on
I
branding.
actually never put those three words together, but that makes sense.
Wasn't brilliant branding, but and our whole MO at that point going forward was we wanted to have solid science, and now we have lots of scientists on the staff. We wanted to do innovative research, oftentimes using government data or data that we developed from other sources that hadn't been analyzed in quite that way before. So that's where Skin Deep came from. Our website for personal care products, our healthy cleaning website, the tap water database, all of those followed that same pattern of looking at a big set of data in a fresh way. I mean, big data back in the day that we could manage with our little Apple computers running sometimes 2 weeks just to do one big sort, really was the foundation of the organization's approach to what we thought at the time was changing public policy, but then something big changed, which was two things really. It got harder and harder to make public policy happen. The media was starting to implode. The business model was starting to fail. This is around late 1990s,
I was just going to
early
ask what
2000s.
year this was.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we noticed when we started putting things on the internets that people were showing up in droves. We had, the first thing we put out was the Dirty Dozen, the Shopper's Guide to Pesticides in Produce. You probably have a wallet version of it or have it in your...
I memorized it. Like, okay, the
You
Clean
would.
15, mushrooms, onions. I already know what I'm getting. Avocado, sweet potato. I know what to order when I'm out.
So people like you, when we published this, we published it because we thought, well, look, we're trying to make the case to the government to do something about these pesticides in food for kids and everyone else that we think aren't safe, and the government was moving pretty slowly. And we'd always get these questions, well, what should I eat? And Richard and a couple of colleagues had the idea, well, why don't we look at the government's pesticide test results and see if we can find the fruits and vegetables that are highest in pesticides, and for those we can say to people, and we can say to farmers, to the market, you should try and find organic for those choices. Apples is always on the list, right? Lots of pesticides in
Strawberries
apples.
is always the number one, isn't it?
Strawberries is always, yeah, almost always number one. Lots of pesticides sprayed. And then, really smart, what if you can't find or afford organic? My friend Phil Landrigan likes to say organic is private school for food. It's great if you can find it and afford it, but a lot of people can't.
It's funny that it's considered bougie when it's literally no chemicals on food.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
actually shouldn't be something that's
It should be
bougie.
baseline.
Exactly.
Not elite.
Right, exactly.
But unfortunately, it still is. So then he looked at the data and said, okay, which fruits and vegetables, the way they're grown, the timing of the pesticide sprays, how they're applied, the type of pesticide used, maybe there are some that are low in pesticide even though they're produced conventionally with chemicals. And there were. So Dirty Dozen and Clean 15. So we put this list out, and we started, we just had a website, not very many years on, and we noticed the traffic going up, and people were downloading this. The second thing we did was we put together, and that's a story in itself, the Skin Deep database, where we looked at personal care products and the ingredients in them. We started with, I think, maybe 10,000 products. And we went to 20, now we're at over 100,000. But at the time when we did that, we thought, well, let's use this database to convince the government that it's time to upgrade our laws and regulations around personal care products, because it's basically a very lightly regulated, almost unregulated industry, right? You can put anything in personal care products.
It's safe until it's proven not safe.
Exactly.
That's actually how it works, right?
Yeah, it's legal. It's not safe.
It's legal, right?
Yeah,
It's
right?
I just want
Yeah.
people to really take that in, because
Totally.
I think that we assume when something is on a shelf at Sephora or Ulta, these big brands, that there's some kind of responsibility.
Yeah.
And really, it's considered safe unless it's proven not safe.
Yeah. If you go to the FDA website, they say right there, we don't examine ingredients or products before they go to market for safety. What?
I want to link that because I feel like sometimes people think like the FDA is hiding it. If it's clear, black and white, they're just really coming out and saying it.
Right.
You can't deny that, because there's the people who argue the other side of it.
Oh, sure.
I call these people who are pro-toxins, I'm so confused. Actually, I was confused by it, and then I realized that they're being paid by big companies to do it. So
Yeah.
I'm like, why are you so passionate about keeping the chemicals in?
Yeah.
It's very confusing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
Right.
creators like myself who will create
And they come
content,
after you.
come after us. And hate can be very loud. So they have these communities of hate of hundreds of thousands of people. So when they post a video about you, which has happened to many of us, then it's just like, I know that when my messages just start pouring in of like how I'm a fake doctor and like, I don't know, and I'm like, oh God, someone must have made a video about one of my videos.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. And it's just It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, you know, it's the most charitable way to put it is we need a dialogue. The other way to put it is, yeah, sometimes people are paid or just have a business model that's contrary to what we're talking about here, which is, you know, these chemicals, we're not saying they're all dangerous. We're saying they ought to be carefully evaluated. And if you go to the FDA website, FDA says we do not do safety evaluations. No one does, except the companies, and the companies aren't required to disclose it.
So then what does FDA approved even mean? Is that only on prescriptions?
Yeah.
Then?
So
So beauty products don't have any FDA approval?
no,
Right.
no. You can just put them on. It's very similar to food and food additives. I mean, most of these are approved by the companies that use them, not by the FDA.
I am confused though because I mean, smaller brands talk about how much testing they have to do to prove before they're able to, like, I wonder if Walmart, Sephora, Ulta does their own testing or has their own, nothing?
If they do it, we've been at this for 15 plus years, no one's mentioned it to us.
Right.
We now have a program called EWG Verified. I know you're familiar with it.
Very.
We make people jump through all these hoops because we wanted to go beyond what we could tell from the label, which is just a list of ingredients, and then there's some information you can get from the trade association for the industry, which is really the regulator, where, you know, they will tell you how it should be used. These certain chemicals shouldn't be maybe used near the eyes or near the mouth or whatever.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit. Can
Yeah.
we stand, because so basically Environmental Working Group, you guys are just a resource for
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
Separately within it, you've got Skin Deep,
Yeah.
which is an app you can download separately. I use it probably 4 times a week.
Oh, great.
As someone in the beauty wellness space, any new gift someone wants to send me, I actually write back and say, if everything is 3 or lower on EWG, I'll accept it. If not, I won't.
Yeah.
Because it's too much to, actually now AI is really helping me.
Yeah,
Instead of
yeah.
one by one, I'll just copy and paste the ingredients and say, look this up on EWG Skin Deep.
Yeah.
But because of the rating system,
Yeah.
I know when something is EWG verified, that's like your stamp of approval.
Yeah. That's the next level from Skin Deep. That's
Right,
yeah.
but on Skin Deep you can see EWG verified products.
Yes, yeah.
So is there any, like, do brands have to pay to get on it? Can they
Yes.
pay? Okay, so
Yeah.
how does that work?
Well, you know, so the way Skin Deep started was this brilliant woman named Jane Houlihan who read a study that came out of the Centers for Disease Control. And it was about phthalates that the scientists had found in the blood of women of childbearing age. And we knew of all kinds of sources, or thought we did, of phthalates, plastic tubing, all kinds of ways in which these plasticizing chemicals are used. But it never occurred to us that they were used in personal care products. But the CDC scientists speculated that the elevated levels in women of childbearing age, which they said was something to be concerned about, aware of, we needed to learn more, probably came from personal care products. And, like, you know, when you think about the environment, you think of smokestacks and tailpipes and effluent going out of pipes into rivers and so forth and so on. I don't think about the cosmetic aisle or shampoo or nail polish, right? But
Now
we
we do,
changed.
but
I
you-
think
you
we
didn't
do.
before.
Yeah, yeah.
Can we test, how do we get this blood test to check for phthalates in our blood?
There are tests for a lot of these things. You have to find the right lab. You have to draw the blood.
Do you
or
guys have a
sometimes
list of labs or anything that would do
we
it?
do. We do have labs that we use all the time, but it's really hard for an individual to get
Well,
just
you need
one
your
or a few
doctor to,
samples.
right. If your doctor writes you a script for it, can they send it to the lab?
Sometimes, but sometimes your doctor won't know where. You know, where do I send this? Where do I? You know, what kind of, and insurance doesn't cover it, right? Which
Right.
is kind of primitive, but the fact of the matter is it doesn't. So Jane says, why don't we find out what personal care products have these chemicals in them? So she had to go shopping. She went to drugstore.com, which is no longer online, and she went to actual stores with some of her colleagues. And that's why we built Skin Deep. It started with that one study, that one concern about women of childbearing age. And when we learned how these chemicals were regulated and products were regulated, which was not at all. We really couldn't believe it. And for the first year or so, when we would call reporters and pitch a story in our new area of work of cosmetics, it was really a hard sell to get the reporters to believe, just as you said, that something that was on the shelf at CVS or Rexall or Neiman Marcus in the cosmetics department, that it wasn't tested rigorously for safety before it was allowed to be put on skin, right?
Of course.
But that was the case. So from there, Jane said, what's the rest of this stuff? Why,
Yeah.
right? And so that was where Skin Deep really started to take off. And just to round out what I said a little bit earlier, when we first built it, we thought, well, this is going to be a great way to go to Congress and regulators and say, don't you think we should update this law, which hasn't been updated since FDR, basically. No real changes to it at all. And in the Food and Drug Administration, food and cosmetics are the weak sisters, so to speak, the least invested in. Drugs and medical devices, they get all the money because there's a fee associated with registering a drug or a medical device, and that fee pays for all the scientists at FDA. We don't have that for food and cosmetics. So we put out Skin Deep, and the traffic was crazy, and then people were going on Amazon and they were shopping for products and saying, well, this rates well on EWG, on this site, this Skin Deep site.
They were leaving their reviews saying
their
that?
reviews
Okay.
on Amazon, yeah. And so that was just based on looking through the ingredients, trying to find any information we could find. Are they regulated in another country? Does FDA have any information on it? Usually no information at all. Does the independent academic literature that I know you read all the time, does that have anything to say? We would look at that and try and put together our assessment of individual chemicals, and then we developed a rating system that allowed those chemicals to be added up, as it were, to come up with a score on Skin Deep. But the traffic to Skin Deep completely changed us, even more than the Dirty Dozen and the Clean
Right.
15. And we thought, just as a time that it was harder and harder to get the media because the reporters were gone, sometimes entire newsrooms were gone, right? We found that we were going directly to people. And now our audience is, I don't know, it's in 35 million sessions a year just to our website, 1,000 people an hour come to Skin Deep. And there are people who, basically have gotten the message. Just because it's legal, you can buy it at a drugstore, doesn't mean it's safe. Now that, by the way, is true of drinking water, food, lots of other things. That may be
get into
another
that.
conversation.
Bottled water blew my mind.
Bottled water, yeah, perfect example. And so what happened then was we started thinking, well, who are these people that are coming to our site, and what do they want? And what they kept coming back to us is, just tell us what's safe. We want to worry about other things.
Well, don't have time.
We don't have
It's complicated.
time.
Honestly, you know what I started doing too? Every time I look one up, I have my assistant and we've created this repository in Sheets, because then I'll forget. So I've got all these things and I put like, okay, 4 are rated 3, maybe 1's rated 2. And that way I'm like, let's say I really need an eyeshadow and it has 1, 4. I'm like, okay, one day I'm going to use it, but I basically started saving it all because I don't have time to look it up every single time either.
Yeah.
Rather just know what's good.
Yeah, I mean, life's short, right? And you're worried about a million other things. And so Skin Deep helped with that issue, but then we wanted to take it to the next level. We wanted to know, okay, what is really the formula here? We wanted to know if fragrance was listed, and we should do a quick sidebar here. If you see the word fragrance on any product, that can mean that there's the presence of dozens and dozens of chemicals that are under that name fragrance and don't have to be disclosed one by one.
Including, can't fragrance have phthalates, but it can say phthalate free?
Yes.
So yeah, your product can say phthalate free, but if it says fragrance, there could be, and there's no regulation or testing.
Yeah.
Fragrance to me has become poison. Like when I see it, I'm like, get this away from me.
Yeah.
I don't know what's in it.
And, you know, as we've said to the fragrance industry, we've been in many conversations with them, we're not asserting that all of the chemicals in fragrance are bad.
Right.
What we're asserting is you're not telling us what's in there.
And why aren't they?
And why? That industry is, it's almost like it's a combination of art and science, and their business model is to sell secret formulas, right?
But they don't have to tell us the amount, because you know what I mean? I could tell you flour, sugar, eggs, and we're not going to make the same cookies if we don't have the same amount. You know, so I'm like, no one's stealing
You're preaching to the choir.
Yeah, they should know. No one's stealing
But they
their formulation.
feel that their formulations are their intellectual property.
Right.
I'm giving their side of the story.
Of course.
And we've talked to them. My friend Michelle Pfeiffer, who's on our board, the famous actress, she decided she was going to start a fine fragrance line. I don't know if you've tried Henry Rose. It's
I've
amazing.
actually just learned about it at, me and EWG did a dinner together the
That's
other
right.
night.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
It was so nice. And Jocelyn was like, you've got to try this brand. It's so nice.
We'll help you out there.
Yeah.
She would love for you to try it, I know. And she just said, I'm going to produce a fine fragrance, so it's only fragrance, where you have to disclose nothing, because there are no other ingredients mostly, but I'm going to disclose all the ingredients. And she couldn't find a fragrance company. She finally worked with IFF that would go along with it. They would not disclose the fragrance because they're afraid of copycats, afraid their intellectual property would stolen and so forth. And you know, it's their business. They think they know it. I'm not going to second guess them. Any lab can reverse engineer a fragrance and find out what's in it. You can run it through a machine and find that out, right? You're a pharmacist.
Yeah, you know what
that.
would be cool is if you worked with companies and they disclosed it to you, you wouldn't tell, but you would give it your stamp of approval. So that way the secret was kept, but you would give it a little...
It's tricky. I mean, we're worried, then we're worried about transparency. So in the EWG Verified program, you have to disclose all your fragrance ingredients.
Yep.
And the reason we went to Verified was our rating system is, you know, we're constantly retooling it, but there are problems when you have lots of
Stop it. Sorry.
concerned about the
my
fragrance
dog
issue.
is concerned.
Concerned about the fragrance ingredients.
Yes.
You're right to be concerned. The real problem is if you have lots of ingredients for which you have limited data, it's really hard to rate them and score them. And we're constantly trying to figure out how to improve on that. We have some improvements coming in the next year or so. Where if we find we can't get information about an ingredient, we may not rate the product that has that ingredient in it. We may just say unrateable.
Right now, when there's limited data, are you giving it a rating?
Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes it's like 1 to 2, or it can be higher.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I don't feel like we've really been consistent. We've really struggled with how to convey to consumers that we don't feel like we know enough to tell you what we think, what our toxicologists think, our chemists think. So we're struggling with that right now, but this all goes back to this basic problem, which is FDA doesn't require testing or detailed profiles of any of these chemicals before it goes in your product. So what we did with Verified was we thought, okay, if we worked with companies and they would sign a bunch of affidavits and agreements that would be legally binding where they would tell us what's in their product, maybe then we could put our mark on something. And really, when people ask, what do you use? What do you recommend? We could say, well, here's an EWG verified shampoo or, soap or whatever. And so that's why we started EWG Verified. Now, we do charge people for that. And here's why. We can't really, we can't ask our donors to help us give technical advice to private companies that are going to make money from it, right?
That makes sense.
Yeah. So we have a fee that companies pay to evaluate ingredients and products, and then we have a whole range of different arrangements to put our mark on. Sometimes it's by the size of the company, sometimes by the number of products, we modify it. And that way we can bring in revenue that covers part of the cost of operating the program, because we really feel that EWG verified, and we now have it for mattresses and diapers and cleaning products. We really feel that in markets like that where there are no standards, really. I mean, there are great companies out there, and this is what I learned. There are great companies out there that want to do the right thing, but they're not rewarded for it. If your shampoo is on the shelf next to, and you've gone to great lengths to make it clean.
Especially when these other brands are using words like natural and clean, when there's no legal ramification to that.
Why not spend it on marketing instead of actual improvements in the safety of the product? Is really the proposition. That's why we decided to launch Verified, and there's some risks there. We've taken pot shots. Is it pay to play? And if we're being honest, it's like we can't charge our donors for this. And also, we can't let private companies launder money through a nonprofit. They have to pay us for our service, right? So that's the genesis of it. It's been an exciting thing for us to take that chance and establish a certification and then verify against it. Because I think a lot of the progress we're going to be making in environmental protection over the years to come is going to be, for better or worse, not through government regulation, but through these third-party certifications that can be, trusted and verified. And we put all our criteria online in great detail. There's some other certifications out there that don't do that. We describe, in infinite detail. We do updates every year for the companies participating in it. And so it's been a real adventure for us, because when you're confronted with the prospect that the government's just not going to move, industry's going to come in and say, we don't want regulation, we like to be self-regulated. Who wouldn't, right?
Of course.
I'll pick my speed limit.
Of course, right.
I feel like going 80 today. When that's the case, as a public interest organization, what do we say to the public about how to protect yourself and your family? So we've taken that step to do that in personal care and cleaning products. And, it's been hard to make it work, but so far we feel like there are a lot of great companies have come to us and have said, we know what you're doing is tricky. We may not be able to meet the test, but we're going to try. And I have to tell you, Mona, that has been one of the most exciting things over the past 10 or 15 years, is meeting some of these private sector entities, leaders who have basically said, I don't want to do it like everybody else. I want to do something that's way beyond what the government requires. And I'm concerned about these chemicals in personal care products. I'm concerned that people don't know what fragrance means in terms of chemicals.
Also, what does the government even require?
Basically, if a product goes bad, if it spoils on the shelf, if it develops mold, that's where the government.
Yes, I actually want to talk about that. I notice that because sometimes I ask, all these beautiful clean brands that I have that don't use preservatives, but then they're like, I'll talk to dermatologists who really are just trained in Western thinking, and they're doing their best, and they're like, but we're worried about mold, and is it going to go bad? And I'm like, so that's the one concern is that, right? Bacteria growth. Everything else doesn't matter.
Yeah, and it's not crazy. I mean, we have rules in Verified that pertain to that question. We don't want people, and this happens all the time. Maybe your guest bathroom or something, you've stored shampoo and you've not gotten around to using it for 5 years. The whole system is built to make sure when you open that shampoo, there's enough preservative in it that it's going to still be okay. It can be on the shelf, right? That
and
really shouldn't be our standard. We should be, let's buy a little more often, buy, products that aren't preserved up to here. And
I also don't, advice to anyone listening, I don't store things in warm rooms. So all of my supplements or beauty products I actually keep in our bedroom because it's always on at least 70. Exactly. So I'll keep them in the cabinet there.
Yeah. No, I think, and these are common sense steps, right? I mean, but if you look at the bulk of the personal care product industry, they're built toward long shelf life, preservatives. Some of them have been driven out of the market by us because we've raised so many concerns about them, and consumers have said, I don't want a product with that in it. I mean, Skin Deep has had that impact, and we've heard it. I had a great conversation. You will love this as a scientist. Great conversation with an executive in the cosmetics industry one time. We were meeting for coffee. I'd never met her before. And she said, you know, you've really had quite an impact with Skin Deep. I said, how so? She said, before Skin Deep came along, women thought they were putting on makeup. And now they think they're putting on chemicals. Mm-hmm. And I wish I'd thought of that, but now I've been using it.
You can use it.
Because that's the case. And so, you know, there are a lot of great companies in the personal care area and a lot of great people who want to move the industry in a direction that does take health and safety, chronic exposures much more seriously. But, you know, they're swimming upstream sometimes.
I do think what's cool about also Skin Deep is you find brands that on the outside some would not necessarily look clean. I am shocked at some of the cleanest ones. So my strategy is I go to Skin Deep, I'll search eyeliner, and then I'll sort from best to worst. So I'll just go and I'll go through, and then I'm like, some of the brands, you know, like shut down because they couldn't stay, but whatever. But I'll find some, like I think it's Gwen Stefani's brand has this eyebrow pencil that doesn't give clean at all in the branding.
Yeah.
Gabriel Cosmetics is also
but
a
it
clean
rates
brand.
well.
Rates great. And I also like, I'll check all the ingredients and I'm like triple checking myself. I'm like, no, this is cleaner than this one that's like natural, holistic, what, you know, all of the jargon and branding.
Absolutely.
So it's really, you've got to really look at the science. And I mean, coming from a science background, I love that you guys are so science driven. That's why I trust you, because there's tons of blogs and websites, but you guys are like, no, we're not putting it out there unless we have the facts.
Yeah, and if we don't know, we try and tell you also, right? We try and be, which is what a science calls for, it seems to me. But you've touched on something that's really important to us, which is if it's just the expensive elite stuff, whether it's food or cosmetics or anything else that's safe, we're not okay with that. We're not interested in promoting that for its own sake. If health and safety aren't democratized, then they're not of interest to EWG, right? We want to make sure that products are available to people, they're affordable, they're accessible. We can't have these elite barriers or these income barriers getting in the way of living a healthy life. And you're right. I mean, just like in the Clean 15, conventionally grown fruits and vegetables, bananas are a great example. I buy organic bananas, but because of the workers, I know they're not exposed to as much when they grow the bananas and ship them and transfer them. But conventional bananas don't have many pesticides in the flesh because of the way the pesticides are used and the nature of the banana. That's democratically accessible environmental health.
Yep.
And that should be our standard. Just like for, you know, the environment, we don't want boutique farms out there and the rest of the landscape be polluted with fertilizers and pesticides. We really want to clean up the whole thing as best we can, right?
Right. And speaking of farming, you need, so actually one of my family members, he's also very passionate on natural food and we bond over it all the time. And he's so frustrated because he tries to grow these vegetables and all the bugs get them and he doesn't want to use pesticides.
Yep.
And then the deer are coming and eating and bunnies and that's a whole other issue. But
I'm familiar.
I'm curious, you have to use some kind of spray or is it like, is the only other option growing indoors? Is there clean pesticides?
There are organically approved pesticides.
Okay.
They tend to be weaker. You have to oftentimes apply them more often. Generally speaking, the approval process at EPA is pretty swift because in many cases they don't even have what is called a tolerance or a legal limit for the pesticide on the food. If it's organically approved, it's probably really safe. But because it's weak, you have to spray it more often. I grow fruits and vegetables at home in California. We don't have huge pest pressure there like you do in a humid area back east here, for example. So it's a little easier. You don't have as
Right.
many bugs, don't have quite as many weeds.
I miss the produce in LA.
Yeah.
We have the best produce
Yeah,
there.
California, right?
California's the best.
It doesn't rain, but you have water, and so it's ideal for growing. And of course, there are other problems like, are we going to be able to have water long term and farm in the desert? All kinds of environmental questions around that. But yeah, that's a challenge, and that's why I think farming's a tough business.
Right, that's what I want to acknowledge.
my
I do
gosh.
get that it's not easy.
Oh, no, this is not easy. And to grow it at scale, I mean, to imagine going out one morning and seeing your whole crop infested, well, that's your income for the year. That's your ability to feed your family or get your kid to college or whatever it may be. So we have to recognize that that's real. The way we've organized our agriculture, these intensive chemical methods are absolutely integral to making it work. So unraveling that, finding safer pesticides, finding safer ways to manage weeds than spraying them from airplanes with Roundup or paraquat, that's kind of the challenge, I think, to work with farmers, reward them, which I think you do with organic food. You're rewarding the trouble someone went to grow something without artificial fertilizers and pesticides. Reward them in the marketplace. Setting up those systems is really critical to sending the signal to farmers to do it the right way, like you would with any other business, right?
Right.
Oftentimes you pay a little more on the front end of the vanguard companies and growers.
Yep, agree. I don't even know how to get into the soil because I'm curious, is that a problem? Like if somebody starts a farm, I mean, you really can't just control the soil on your farm. It's a bigger picture thing, right? It's not like I can just buy clean soil because it's part of the entire earth.
When you buy farmland, you're buying the history of that farmland.
Right.
If it's organic that you're wanting to move into.
Because there's farm shares now, which I'm very interested in.
Yeah.
To do with a few families. But how am I going to get the best soil?
How do you find, with organic, there's a 3-year waiting period to, make sure that pesticides haven't been used on that land during the 3 years or artificial fertilizers. There are rules for all of that under the USDA organic seal. And so, but for the most part, you don't really know how the land has been treated in great detail. Most times when you are trying to acquire some land or start a farm or even expand it. And we have this problem now in many parts of the country where farmers were told that they could use sewage sludge on their land as a fertilizer, spread it on their land, and cities were trying to get rid of it from their sewage treatment plants. And so it looked like a win-win 40 years ago, right? And sometimes they composted the sewage, so it was maybe a little bit more, obviously more
Sterilized?
improved.
I don't know.
A little more sterilized, at least for the biological contaminants, right?
Right.
The bugs, because it heats up in the compost pile. But the toxic chemicals would still be there, right? And now we have this problem with these forever chemicals, the PFAS chemicals that are in sewage.
And why are they called forever chemicals? Can you explain that?
They just never break down. These are the chemicals that were used to manufacture Teflon and Scotchgard, some of the brands you would know of, but thousands of other applications that don't have a brand on them. They're chemicals with fluorine atoms in them, and they are very resistant to sunlight, microbes. They just last a long time.
So it's like they're being created and created as we create more plastic, but they can't get broken down. So at some point, what's going to happen?
Yeah, well, they've built up in the environment, and since we're all exposed to them in food and air and water, still, even though EPA's gradually taking steps to regulate them, these things end up in our sewage, and when they've been spread on farmland, farmers, at the time were told this is going to be a good source of fertilizer for your land, pay a lot less than you might pay if you bought commercial fertilizer. It made it appealing. Cities were desperate to get rid of it. the problem is now that we've understood that these PFAS chemicals don't go away and that there are thousands of different varieties, farmers are stuck with land that's contaminated, and in some cases it has gotten into the food. It gets into leafy greens. There are farms in Maine and other parts of the country where the cattle have grazing on pasture that's had sewage sludge applied. They've taken it up, and the cattle, the dairies and cattle operations can no longer function. They've basically shut down.
I think
So it's a big concern.
so. There's two emotions I'm having right now listening. The first one is like, great, there's nothing we can do. It's everywhere. But then the other one is, this is what people need to know because
Yes.
it will inspire them to stop buying plastic. Even for me, for years I've been avoiding plastic, right, in my Tupperware. But I would still buy brands that came in plastic because
How
I was
can you
like,
avoid it?
what can I not?
Yeah.
But I will say, when you make an effort, you can find. Like I only buy a sauerkraut brand now that comes in glass, or I will only buy a pickle jar that comes in glass. If you do put in a little bit of effort, the one thing I can't get around is when you buy meat or fish, it's always wrapped in plastic. But you can make more and more steps.
No, that's right. And when think about it this way, the more you do that, the more you're sending a signal back to the marketplace, hey, package this differently.
Yeah,
or produce
mustard.
it.
I'm making my own mustard now because even the organic ones are coming in plastic.
Yeah.
And it's also very easy to make condiments, FYI.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that over time, this I'm not a neoliberal who thinks markets can solve all problems. I think the government has to do its job and protect us. But in the meanwhile, in many cases, the fastest, deepest way to make change happen is by market forces reacting to consumer demand and shifting towards safer, healthier alternatives. That's why it is sort of funny that there are so many people out there defending chemicals. What they're really defending is old ways of making products against the newcomers that are taking their market share away from them, right? Which is what we want. We want the good stuff to displace the less good stuff in every walk of life, right?
Yep. And I do think that they have an audience because it's harder to live this way.
Sure.
You know, so like if someone's telling you, don't be scared, like this is not real science, you're fine. I'd be like, okay, great, I don't have to think about it. So that's where they're, but unfortunately it's not.
Yeah, and if you want proof, and you don't trust EWG or our scientists, trust the scientists and all the professional associations that have issued statements about the risks of chemicals, whether it's the Academy of Pediatrics, the Endocrine Society. Oh my gosh, you should go to the Endocrine Society website. Now this is like 20,000 people who are scientists and medical practitioners.
Oh, I didn't know about this.
That you go to if you have a hormone problem, right? Endocrinologists, and they work at the part per trillion level with things that affect our hormones, as you know, right?
So these are not just this is not just a community of all endocrinologists. It's the ones who care about chemicals.
It's the professional society of all of them. It's the main professional
society. But do they respect this stuff? Because I feel like traditional endocrinologists, I know for thyroid, no one's ever been like, don't use plastic. They're like, take a thyroid pill.
Well, if you look at their website now, what the Endocrine Society says about endocrine disrupting chemicals is eye-opening.
Okay.
In fact, I read it from time to time and I think, man, we better step up our game here at EWG. We're falling behind the Endocrine Society, the actual endocrinologists, because they have seen the evidence. And it's true of many health outcomes where there's just a dawning awareness that chemicals are playing a role, that we're not evolving this quickly to higher rates of cancer or immune system problems or whatever. This is something that's an interaction between what we bring to the party genetically and the environment. So what's the environment piece? We don't always know, but there's more and more interest in that. And I hold the Endocrine Society as the prime example. I just interviewed an endocrinologist who studied thousands of chemicals on the brain receptors that can affect the development, the onset of puberty. Just did a podcast interview with her, published a an article in Endocrinology, the main journal, peer-reviewed journal of the Endocrine Society. And, you know, she basically said, yeah, there's reason to be concerned. We found some of these chemicals. Everyone's wondering why are girls starting puberty earlier? Sometimes at age 6 or 7?
No, oh my God.
Yes. I mean,
I
my
knew like
wife said-
9, but 6 or 7 is just getting so bad.
yeah, my wife said, thank God we had a boy and not a girl, because I would have been out of my mind, right? What are we doing to our girls? Well, we don't know for sure, but you know, her feeling is that some of these exposures might be triggering early onset of puberty.
I wanted to ask for men and women, like, because you guys brought, are you really the ones who brought glyphosate to everyone's attention?
Oh, there were a lot of groups that
there was
focused
another
on that, but
chemical that you brought. What was it?
Chlormequat?
Yes, and there was something else I thought. But
That we did bring to people's attention.
atrazine.
Atrazine we started working on in the mid-1990s, yeah.
Yes. So you were finding these things that no one was talking about.
Yeah.
Is there something now that no one's talking about that we need to know, like specifically for women's health and men's health, that we should be avoiding? That's not, or what is the most important thing?
I have to be careful not to say anything that my scientists haven't said, okay, we're ready to go, boss.
And maybe there's nothing ready yet.
Yeah, I mean, we're constantly looking at, you know, at this from two perspectives. One, we're trying to deepen our understanding of the science that helps us explain why these problems might be happening, right? And that's, you know, that's a harder task. And the second thing is on the lookout for new chemicals, new exposures that might be taking place that we just didn't know about. And one of those is chlormequat. And that's a complicated story. I have a, not that complicated. I have a great scientist on my staff, Lexi Temkin. Yeah, I don't know if you've met her, yeah.
Lexi.
Lexi's a toxicologist and with a deep understanding of immunology. And she was the lead person when we were trying to figure out why people were exposed to Roundup, to glyphosate. And there had been studies done by a number of nonprofits. When we did it, we went to some lengths to do it to our standards. And the long story short is that there were a lot of oat products out there that had this weed killer on them when you ate it, in your Cheerios, for example, or sometimes in health bars. Right, that weren't organic. And that's because they would spray the oats at the end of the season to kill them, to dry them out, so that it was easier to harvest them all at the same time. You didn't wait for them to dry in nature, because they might get rained on, and then you'd lose part of your crop. You would spray them, kill them, go in and harvest. Especially in Canada, this is how oats were grown, and so Roundup was being used as a desiccant at the end of the season. These weren't GMO modified plants. There's no GMO wheat yet, or oats. These were regular plants that were therefore susceptible to being sprayed and killed by Roundup, this ubiquitously used weed killer. And so we worked on that for a while, and our tests show that it looks like the pressure on the marketplace has driven down some of the levels of glyphosate in these oat products, because consumers stopped buying it, right?
Wow.
We told them, yeah, try something else. There's other kinds of cereal. You don't have to buy the stuff that has glyphosate.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is, right? But that can be the power of the market. And you don't have to do a boycott. You can, these days, these companies are looking for little changes in market share, and when they figure out what the cause is and that it's a problem that's going to make it keep getting worse, they'll change, right? That's also the power of the internet, to talk to individual consumers. So then Lexi, who had done that, overseen a lot of that work with other colleagues on our staff, she said, well, I wonder if they get rid of glyphosate, what else are they going to use on wheat or oats in Canada?
That was my thought too.
And it was chlormequat. And it was been used in Europe for years, and we had never crossed our radar. I mean, we were like, chlorma what? Well, it's a growth regulator, basically. It's thickens the stem of the plants so that they don't fall over at the end of the season when the grain heads are heavy. It's called lodging. They they're more robust, and that also is helpful to farmers who are trying to get the maximum off of their land. I'm not blaming them. I'm just, this is the economics of it. You want to get every bushel.
I actually like
off.
the way you're explaining it because it makes us empathetic to the farmers too.
Yeah, we
understand.
We're all caught up in these systems, right? And I think, farmers probably don't think we're very understanding when we reveal these things, but the fact of the matter is we do understand that it's a change process, and it's difficult, and sometimes these silver bullet chemicals that are sold to them by chemical companies, no surprise, they have downsides. But, if everyone around you is using it and it seems to be working and you're selling more oats than before, look, they're human. But we found it in oat products shortly after it was being used and imported into the U.S. We found it in people. We took blood samples and sent them to a lab in England, I think. And they found elevated levels already in Americans, at least the ones that we tested. So we'll do follow-up work there. But this is this kind of whack-a-mole problem.
They get rid of one, but they replace it with another, and they're like, oh, look, we're not using glyphosate, but now we don't know anything about this new chemical, and it's endless.
Yeah.
I read something
That's
once.
why organic is a good solution,
exactly.
right? Because you're not whacking those moles. You just know that you don't have to worry about the chemical du jour, the toxic of the day. You're eating something or using something that didn't have chemicals to begin with.
I think someone said once they can just replace polysorbate 80 with polysorbate 60, and then they can create polysorbate 50, so they can make the consumer think they're banning it.
Yeah.
And I wonder if, like, at the root of it, it's a little bit of greed, where it's like when you're trying to do anything, like you're trying to mass market it or you're trying to scale it, you're going to have to compromise.
Yeah.
So that's almost life. It's like you choose this or you choose this. Do you want to make more money and it's going to hurt people's health and your health, or do you want to make less money and care about your health? You just have to make a choice.
Yeah, that's right. And these are chronic health problems, so they're not going to materialize for years. It's not like you're going to suddenly develop a health problem, a cancer or endocrine disruption or hormone disruption.
Right, so you think you're okay until you're not.
So it's long term, right? And look, don't we all look away from some big problems in the world? You can't look at all of them. And I think in the case of personal care products and food, the environment of our everyday life, Mona, that's where you do have some control if you're just a little bit careful. And you're right. We never tell people, look, if you're not eating all organic or shopping for these products that we approve, then forget about it. What we say is make the changes you can, make a difference, give yourself some wins, right? That's the motivator, right? Give yourself some wins. And over time, we're going to send the signal to the marketplace. You're going to be healthier, your family's going to be healthier, you're going to reduce an exposure that has some risk associated with it. And over time, companies are going to say, you know what, let's move out of these phthalates for this application. Let's move out of chlormequat, spraying it on oats, or glyphosate, Roundup on oats. It is going to happen. The government's not going to do that. That's the lesson. You look at the last 30 years, we had in the U.S. a huge number of environmental laws passed in the 70s and 80s. But by the mid-90s, it had really come to a halt. The immune system of the industry, speaking of immunology, the immune system kicked in, and they realized that they had a real problem because the economy kept growing, but despite environmental regulations, and that was not that was not welcome news for a lot of industries. That meant more regulations would come on, and early adopters, innovators would adopt and adapt, and the economy would continue to grow with safer stuff. But if you're stuck with all this old equipment, old way of thinking, old formulations, old economics, it's worth spending some money on lobbyists to stop it.
Yep.
And so they did, right? And it's been very, very difficult to pass environmental laws since really 1996. And so what do we do? Well, that's where I think the combination of companies that want to do the right thing don't accept government good enough for government work. They don't accept that precept. They don't accept it's okay if it's legal, even if it's not safe. They want to do more. And there are a lot of companies out there who want to do that. There are, a lot of them here for Climate Week. And good people in those companies who are pushing, right? To me, that's what makes this as exciting a time as ever to be an environmentalist. It's a different kind of environmentalist than when I was coming up. I wanted to be Ralph Nader, and I love a lot of his legacy. The government should do its job. We should make the government do its job. We should hold companies accountable through government law and regulation. I'm all about it. But there are so many gaps now where people are unprotected because we can't get the government. We have the political power to get the government to move. This is where I think people who do what you do and help people understand healthy living, healthy practices, these incremental changes, these new habits. That's why it's so important, Mona, that you've reached the audience that you've reached, because those are folks who are going to make that leap between what's legal and what's safe to the benefit of their own health and their families.
I can't thank you enough for starting this company. It's just something I rely on every single day, and I feel like you are really making it easy for people. Again,
we're trying.
You're helping people do their best, because it's not sustainable to be perfect. I mean, like we said, this is one area that you and I happen to be very passionate on, but there's so many other things in politics that other people really want to care about too. Maybe they're doing less here, but just that little bit that you can do, making that right choice, and wherever you can afford it, I think it's really great.
Exactly right.
What is next? Is it the same mission? Is there something different you're working on?
We're working on a lot of these pesticide and toxic chemical issues. We're taking up, like a lot of people are doing now, a lot of environmental groups like ours, looking at this whole situation with plastics and what we're going to do about it, the microplastics, the nanoplastics that we all have in us now. That wasn't the advertisement for plastics when they were introduced, that, there's just going to be a little bit of plastic in your baby when it's born. Like, no one said that, right?
No.
It was Teflon chemicals, and now it's plastics. So we're taking a close look at that. That's going to be a tough one to really manage, because plastics are so important to every corner of our lives. But we have to rethink how they're made, their life cycle, what becomes of them. It's not okay to have, quite apart from the litter that might be out there, it's also not okay to have these plastic chemicals and plastic fine tiny particles in people or in animals in the world. So that's a challenge for the next generation coming along of environmentalists who work in the environmental health area. And it's a convergence of climate change and health. It often converges.
Well, anything I can ever do to support.
I know you're there.
I'm there with you.
We're thrilled to have you by our side. We really are.
And everyone can, the best place to find all of your information is just Environmental Working Group.
Yeah, EWG.org.
Yep.
We try and make it accessible there. We have an app, the Healthy Living app, if you want to, that covers personal care products, cleaning products. We have food scores, similar system to rate food. And again, all of these have the gaps and weaknesses that really come about because of lack of government information requirements when products and ingredients are put on the market. So we try and do our best to fill those gaps and try and make it easy for people to use our information without wagging our finger. No finger wagging at the Environmental Working Group. It's all about options and choices, right? And for if you're not concerned about pesticides, that's great. Go for it. But if you are concerned, we have some practical tools for you to do something about it in your everyday life.
I love that. If you're not concerned, that's fine. But if you are, we're here to help.
That's right.
Perfect ending. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Take care.